What's up, everybody? Today, we're going to be advocating for working in tech support. Now, if you're working in tech support right now, I can almost guarantee you hate it. It takes a very special type of person to truly enjoy tech support. You really have to be into having relationships with people and catering to people day in and day out. There are a lot of people out there who really truly enjoy the feeling and are fulfilled by helping people with their computer problems, which is a wonderful thing. And I can say from my perspective, I did not enjoy working in tech support. I did it for 5 years, and I always looked at it as a sort of stepping stone to where I really wanted to go, which was cybersecurity. However, being in cybersecurity today, I can tell you some of the people who are the absolute best to work with when it comes to issues with my security tools are the same people that have been working for this company for like 20 years, and they spent their entire lives doing tech support. You know, there's one guy who I used to work with him whenever I was in tech support. He lived in New Orleans, and he had been with this company for at least 20 years. I know it's been more than 20 years at this point. And he basically ran that office by himself, and it was incredible. The fact that you could have an entire large city like New Orleans relying on a single guy, and he was very knowledgeable and he was really into what he does, it was just amazing to see. There are a couple of people just like him who are in similar positions. They still are in a tech support type of role. They might have a management title in some cases, or they're lead technical analyst, something like that. But these guys are really into what they do. They care more about solving problems than anything else. And I think generally speaking, these guys are true technologists. Now, I know by definition, technologist is somebody who's really an expert in the field and knows in depth almost everything about whatever area it is that they specialize in. But these guys are like the technologists of tech support, and they really deeply care about user experience. And if something goes wrong, they're the first ones to jump into it. So I'm kind of dedicating this video to guys like that. The guys that are around for decades, putting hard work and effort into what they do. And I'll mention one other guy in case he sees this one day. Another guy that I worked with whenever I was in tech support, and I used to work in the office. I work from home now. He came over to the US from Vietnam at a very young age. I think he was under 10 years old. And I don't know what kind of work he's done throughout his life, but I know for the last 20-ish years, he's been working in tech support. And he's kind of the Mac OS support guy in the local office. And he's a fantastic person, hilarious. And he may not be the most technical person around, but he's one of the guys that you can rely on. And he does care about the quality of his output. So if you're watching this, I appreciate you. So before I get into the reasons that I'd like to advocate for tech support roles, I'd like to talk about the bad stuff, because I think that that's probably going to relate a lot more to those of you that are watching this video. So I'll get you on my side, and then we'll talk about the reason why it's actually a good thing. Number one is low pay. Compared to almost every other role in technology, tech support is a very low paying position. And that can be very frustrating because it's also a very high stress type of position. You know, just if you think about it, if somebody has a problem with their computer or a piece of software that they're using, they want that problem to be solved so that they can get back to work. Sometimes it's going to cost the company money. It's going to cost them their job potentially, depending on how long they're out of commission. And so you have a lot of high pressure situations. And another thing, people that work in tech support, if you work for a large organization that does layoffs periodically, you have to interface with the people that are turning in their equipment or maybe trying to get data off of their machine before they leave the company, things like that. That can be a really stressful thing to deal with. And compared to many others in the organization, you might be getting paid an amount of money that you might deem is borderline disrespect. But I think as it relates to pay, the most important thing to consider is that tech support is not a specialized role. You do end up with very specific skills as a result of working in tech support, but generally speaking, you don't go to school to learn how to do tech support. They might do a tech support kind of class, which is funny because I actually had a class like that. Maybe because my school knew that most of the people they were shipping out into the world were going to have to do tech support roles before they would move up. I don't know. But when you're talking about the type of money that you can make in the market, a lot of the time you have to have a specialty and or a certain degree of education to really earn the money that you want. So that is definitely one of the main cons, if not the one that sits at the very top and is the most bothersome to people that work in tech support roles. Next to low pay is low respect. Now, this is not always the case. I would say in the 5 years of tech support that I did, I was very well respected. Almost every person that I helped would say thank you at the very end. They were always very appreciative. And some people enjoyed me so much. Whenever I was doing tech support, I also kind of did like a field tech type of role. So I would go around and see people face to face, and people enjoyed seeing me, and we'd, sit and talk for a little while. And that's just one of the benefits of working with people face to face, but especially whenever you're helping them with a problem, you're kind of enabling this person to do their job. And so most people are very respectful. But I think when you consider the level of respect from your peers that work in other areas of technology, they look at tech support as kind of being lower on the totem pole, which can be seen as a disrespectful thing. And I want to say, if you feel that way, I agree. I was in that position too. I used to look at myself being in a tech support role as being a bad thing. And so I was kind of disrespecting myself in a way. I made myself feel bad about working in tech support. And also there's a level of blatant disrespect that you could be on the receiving end of as a result of being in that lower level position whenever you're dealing in particular with people that are higher up. And that doesn't go for large organizations or small organizations in particular. It's, anybody, anywhere. And you can also find people that get frustrated with tech support personnel anywhere in the organization, but you will find that people in certain positions that are known for being powerful positions are more likely to be more frustrated people. And I would say that the main reason for that probably just comes down to personality type more than anything, but there's also the possibility of a heightened level of stress. Their time is more valuable in a monetary sense. So if they're losing valuable time, that could be more stressful. And that might push them towards acting in a way perhaps they wouldn't normally. Now, I'll say I've been very fortunate that in the organization that I'm part of over the last, 8 years, there's not a lot of that. I think the corporate culture of the organization that I work for is mostly cleansed of that. I don't know why. It's just kind of a rare thing. You don't run into it very often. But I used to work for an orthopedic hospital, and not picking on anybody in particular, but doctors are kind of iffy sometimes. I had good relationships with some doctors. Other doctors were kind of difficult, with everyone that they interacted with. But that's a prime example of, one-to-one dealing with someone that's higher up in an organization, especially when they're part ownership, can be a little rocky at times. And when you work in tech support, you might feel like the reason that it goes that way is because you're in tech support. So definitely, I would say that's one of the things that probably bothers a lot of people that work in tech support. Another con is just that there's not a whole lot of growth opportunity because it's lacking in specialization. Tech support is in general. And also there's a lot more turnover. You can find somebody to do a tech support job almost anywhere at any time. As you move into other roles that are specialized, you'll find that growth is more so about stability and your specialization. How strong are your skills in the particular area that you work in? That's what's going to get you opportunities. And of course, longevity. If you're sticking around, you're going to get growth opportunities. In tech support, it almost seems like it's about just sticking around for a long time and developing leadership skills, which can be kind of difficult whenever you're working on tickets all day. You almost have to look for opportunities to earn certificates or get, some other form of education to make yourself stand out, because in tech support, everyone is kind of doing the same thing. You're working on any type of ticket, and it's it's a mile wide and an inch deep whenever it comes to skill set. And that kind of depends too. You know, the guys that have been around for 20 years, they're really good at what they do and they have a lot of tricks up their sleeve. But there are certain people that get picked to do management type positions in tech support. And I would say that comes down to personality a lot of the time. I think that can be the case in other roles as well. But whenever it comes to growth in tech support, your path forward isn't as kind of clear cut. It feels like to me. High stress is another major con. So we've kind of talked on stress a little bit, but I would say that when I was working in tech support, the volume was just so high. I mean, there's never a shortage of tickets. There's always more than you can handle. And even if everyone on your team is just like really working hard and they're hitting the ground running every single day, there's always going to be more than you can ever get done. So the stress level can get extremely high. There have been multiple times throughout my tech support career where I would close 100+ tickets per week. I was doing things like imaging laptops, repairing laptops, replacing hardware, swapping batteries and mice, cable management, troubleshooting software issues, troubleshooting hardware issues, resetting passwords, unlocking accounts, and just everything. Printers I know on this channel are a hot topic. And so I know what it's like to have that much of a workload that just never seems to go away. That high stress, I think, was my biggest issue. You know, I didn't love the low pay, but I would say the high stress really compounded things. Another con from my perspective is that in my experience in tech support, it was when you're entry level, it's like a trial by fire, because when you go to school and you learn about technology, that you can only learn so much, especially if you do what I did. I went to a technical, what would you call it? A technical school. And I was there for 18 months. And then I went out and did an internship. And then my internship turned into a full-time job. I remember at that time, you know, I was never one to talk on the phone. I've always hated talking on the phone. But at that time, especially, I was 18 years old and I was getting into a role that I knew was primarily help desk. I was so terrified to get on the phone for the first time because I don't know what's going to happen when I answer the phone. I don't know what type of issue the person's going to have. The person is probably going to be a lot more familiar with the system that they're complaining about than I could ever get familiar with. I didn't know how to use any of the tools. I didn't know how to take good notes, anything like that. So it really was a trial by fire. And almost every ticket that you pick up is like that throughout the entire time that you're working in tech support. A lot of the time, you're going to pick up a ticket that's unrelated to the last ticket that you worked on. And so you're constantly being hit with, I have this problem or that problem, and you have to figure out how to troubleshoot that problem. And if you're just getting started, it's really not easy to figure that out. So especially when you're doing help desk, because you're on the phone with a living person, you know, you don't have time to sit there and research. You're talking to someone and they expect you to know what to do and they expect you to know it right now. So that was one of the more traumatizing parts about my internship, is that I had to start answering the phone for the very first time. And it was scary. I would try not to answer the phone as much as I could because I was trying to learn. I only wanted to deal with so much, and I wanted to absorb it. Now, at that time, luckily, I was able to handle less phone calls. But at that company, which I don't work for anymore, but at that company where I was answering the phone sometimes 100 times a week, it was a smaller company and it was less complicated. So I was able to learn it over the course of about a year and a half. I remember I got pretty good at it, and I was never afraid to answer the phone. And even if I didn't know how to deal with the problem that I was presented with, I would take notes on it and I would come back and I would reach out to the person. And, you know, I always found a way to move forward. But I think that trial by fire nature really kind of molded my brain, especially I was so young at the time, 18. And that really molded me into someone that was capable of doing what I do today with a reasonable amount of organization, even in a chaotic situation. So I'm trying not to go into the pros here, but just a little spoiler alert, that's kind of one of the things I'll talk about. Another con, there's very little time to slow down. The only times that I ever felt any type of relief were during the times where most people were taking PTO, and that's typically for holidays. Christmas time, 4th of July, maybe. The first company that I worked for, if I remember correctly, didn't celebrate government holidays. You know, if you work for the government, you get a day off on certain holidays. We didn't have that, so we were just always working. And the few times that was not the case was during Thanksgiving and Christmas time. So those were my times to kind of have a little bit of slowdown. But every day for the rest of the year was just constant, back and forth, juggling tickets, answering the phone constantly. It was a very difficult thing to do, thinking back on it. And due to that, you always have a constant backlog. There were times where I would have something like 30 or 40 tickets open at the same time, even when I worked for a smaller organization, which is really kind of crazy to think about. As I worked for larger organizations, it made more sense to have a massive backlog because you're dealing with so much all the time from tens of thousands of people, more than that. But, any company that's over the size of 10,000 people, your tech support personnel are probably drowning a good bit. I know I was. And when the phone's not ringing, that's your opportunity to kind of dig into your backlog. So if you're someone who's having issues with energy, I'm tired every single day now. If I felt like this when I worked in tech support, I could not do it. I don't know what the deal is. I'm about to be 30. I should have more energy than I do. So I started doing cardio again to kind of fix that. But I certainly couldn't do what I did back in the day. I was young enough and had the energy to do it. And it's just crazy to think back on. Okay, so we've gotten into enough of the cons. I think now we can talk about some of the pros. So the first thing that I want to highlight as far as the good parts about working in tech support is the fact that you are exposed to a lot of different types of issues. And being exposed to a lot of different types of issues means that you're going to develop in your technical skill set, and especially your troubleshooting skills, very quickly, because it's a survival skill when you work in tech support. You have to know how to talk to people on the phone. You have to visualize things in your head as you're talking through it with the user. You might have to tell them click here, click here, click here without being able to see it. And it can get really complicated. But I think that because of the very wide range of different issues that you could run into, it gives you a great foundational knowledge of technology as a whole for you to be able to move into other areas if you decide to. If you're someone who's working in tech support right now and you want to go into a different area, like cloud computing or security, those types of things, you are building a fantastic foundation for a future pivot, especially when it comes to troubleshooting. You're going to know certain questions to ask. And you might think out of the box as opposed to somebody who immediately got into a specialized role straight out of school. So that's a big deal. And that's going to help you with your career growth down the line. Because what ends up separating you when you work in a specialized role is how well do you handle the stress, the volume, what's your quality of output look like? And I think working in tech support, being so stressful all the time and having to be organized in that high stress type of scenario, it really sets you up to be very good at a specialized role, because specialized roles are a little bit slower paced and you get to go deeper into the information to help more complicated specialized problems. So yes, learning a lot about a lot of different things I think is great for your foundational knowledge and understanding of technology as a whole. And I would say that most people who have gone into tech support at some point in their tech career are probably more technical or more technically skilled, I should say, than those who just went to school, got a master's degree, and then started working a specialized role. I mentioned this before. It's really good for brain conditioning. I think, again, that the high volume and high stress was really good for my brain to kind of be rewired to handle the work that I do today in a better way than I otherwise could have. I'm not somebody who went to school for 4 years. I went to school for 18 months, and I have been relatively successful despite that. And I think that's got a lot to do with my work ethic, and my work ethic has a ton to do with how stressful those old jobs were that I used to have in tech support. So look at tech support as an opportunity to condition your mental state and your day-to-day approach to work in a way that's going to benefit you down the line. It also helps you develop your interpersonal skill set. If you got into tech support at a young age and maybe you didn't have customer facing type of job at any point in your life, working in tech support is an opportunity for you to develop your interpersonal or social skills in a corporate environment. So my first job, not ashamed to say it, was actually Walmart. I was a seasonal cashier, and I just did that job for a couple of months to save some money before I went off to college. And working in that position, hated it, but it did teach me how to interact with people. Now, that type of job was a lot different because I was sitting at a cash register and I was ringing up people's items, and you're dealing with people from all walks of life, and that can be really unpredictable, especially in the area that I lived in. It wasn't the nicest. So you get people in there that were really, they were challenging. Anytime you work with the public, it's going to be kind of complicated. So I think I developed a certain skill set and a way of talking to people face to face whenever I was a cashier for 3 months. I did it. Actually, I was hired full time, and I did it for a couple more months before I went off to school. So maybe 5-6 months I did that. And then it wasn't until I started doing the call center type of help desk type of role, where I was talking to people one-on-one all the time again. And so at that time, I had a little bit of skill, but I was more so worried about my technical troubleshooting, being able to understand what an issue is and how to pick it apart. And during those years where I was doing help desk calls all the time, I wouldn't say that I got really good at my customer service kind of voice. I was a lot more committed to it then than I am now. I'm a lot more informal, but I did learn how to talk someone through an issue and how to understand what they're saying, even if what they're saying isn't really on par with what you need them to say to truly understand what they're getting at. You kind of learn, I guess social engineering isn't a good word for it, but you can kind of work someone into divulging information that you need by asking certain questions and saying certain things. So that was one of the skills that I picked up in my tech support role, my kind of help desk role. And I take advantage of that quite a bit today. I don't have to get on the phone nearly as often as I used to, but when I do, and when I have to do complicated troubleshooting, those skills come right back out. So even though help desk is without a doubt the absolute worst, most frustrating job that you can do in tech, it does give you that type of skill set to work with. Working in tech support also helps you learn how to get out of your comfort zone. It doesn't really give you a choice. When you first start doing tech support type of work and you're doing help desk, again, I mentioned trial by fire earlier, you're never really in a comfort zone. Your comfort zone comes only whenever there's a holiday and most of the people are off, but you happen to be working and it's a quiet day. Otherwise, you are constantly out of your comfort zone. And whenever you pivot into a role that is specialized later, you'll find a comfort zone and you'll kind of nest your way into it. And then you have to get creative and find ways to get out of your comfort zone. But when you work in tech support, you kind of get acclimated to being uncomfortable, which is a good thing. It sounds funny, but it can be really draining. You don't have much energy at the end of the day because of this. But again, that is kind of it's not really a skill, but whenever you find yourself in uncomfortable positions later on, when you have a specialized role, you want to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, if that makes any sense at all. Another skill that I developed when I worked in tech support was organizational skills. So I mentioned before, when the phones never stop ringing, you have to find a way to stay organized. If you pick up the phone, somebody tells you about a problem and you have to get back to them, you need to take notes that you're going to come back to later. Maybe sometimes you have to sit down and create tickets. There were times where I would have a notepad file that was just 15 tickets that I would have to go back and create. I'd have to sit down and individually create each ticket if I wanted credit for the work that I was doing. So that was one thing that I used to stay organized. I've also, over the years, learned to use Microsoft OneNote as like a big knowledge base. Anytime that I learn something new, I throw it in the OneNote. Now, that's a skill that I actually picked up in my current role because one of my managers was using OneNote for his organizational stuff. And I picked that up, and I wish that I had known that when I was in tech support, because that would have been extremely valuable. So if you haven't considered using OneNote yet, go ahead and start doing it. But the other thing is, as it relates to the organizational stuff, if you have documentation that you store, that's always been one thing that I've done. I kind of hoard documentation. I write my own documentation a lot of the time. You want to have it stored in a place where if somebody asks you a question and you think to yourself, oh, I have a document about that, you want to know where to find it. So in tech support, that's where I really learned, I'm a hoarder of files, so I know where to put everything and where to find it whenever I need it again. And in that kind of fast-paced environment, that can be a lifesaver for you. Speaking of documentation, that's another thing that tech support is really good for. Almost every issue that you run into is going to be different from the last and the next. So everything that you learn that you didn't know before is an opportunity for documentation, as long as it's not like a click, a click here, a click there. But if you're talking about multiple steps that you need to take to complete a certain action, then that's where documentation becomes really valuable. And I think in particular, one of the things that comes to mind that I wrote documentation about back in the day was clearing storage space off of a laptop. There were people that worked in tech support alongside me that knew where to go and what to do to clear storage space, but I've never been very good at memorizing the steps like that. So I would create documentation for myself, and I would say, run this tool, run that tool, run that tool, go to this folder, delete the temp cache, stuff like that. And when you're writing documentation that has a lot of steps to it, and you're adding a lot of screenshots to give yourself very specific information, and then you start sharing the documentation that you write, that can be a very valuable skill. Because let's say you move into a specialized role later on and you are trying to help peers of yours do certain things, you might get repetitive questions. If you have a piece of documentation for it, you can just throw it at them. Or if a user reaches out to you with a question and you happen to have written a piece of documentation around the specific steps that they're asking about, you can hand it to them instead of having to get on the phone and spend 30 minutes to an hour trying to teach someone something that you've taught 100 people before. Put it down on documentation, make it look nice, make it, very concise, and then start sharing it. And when you're providing value like that to your peers, they get better at the job. They have the documentation for themselves to look at, so they don't have to ask you the questions again. So you're getting less questions, you get more time for yourself, and you are, providing value to the team. So that is, that's also a great opportunity for you to develop a leadership skill, teaching others how to do the job and how to do it efficiently and how to improve the way that they do it. And that will help you in the long term with your career growth. And I think I've got time for about one more here. So the last one that I jotted down, the last major pro, is that you interact with people all throughout the organization. There might be times where you have to help the janitor, and then there will be times where you have to help the CEO. I have dealt with both of those situations in the first job that I worked. And you get to see how certain people do their work. That might tell you how they got to where they are. So if you, for example, wanted to be a CEO for some reason, you could learn from that person via your interactions with them one-on-one. And you might work at a large organization where you don't really interface with the CEO, CIO, the chief types very often, if ever, but you are going to interact with people that have that same type of personality and that same type of approach to their work. So as you interact with people all throughout the organization, at the top, at the bottom, in the middle, you get to make an impact on those people. And let's say just by chance, you have an impact on somebody, you make an impact on somebody who ends up in a position of power, and then they can elevate you. Maybe you never saw that person was going to do this for you one day, but if they remember you, if they know you, then they will elevate you. So that's another important lesson to learn. That one in particular, as it pertains to longevity. If you stick around in an organization long enough and enough of the people know you and they have climbed up the ladder, they will take you with them. Something to think about. All right, that's all I have time for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you feel a little bit better about working in tech support. Even though it totally sucks, there are a lot of benefits to it as well. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and we'll see you next time. Stay secure.